Hi, my name is Malin, and this is my data analysis on the crimes and criminals of Criminal Minds Evolution Season 4. I've watched every episode of Criminal Minds and Criminal Minds Evolution and recorded data on who dies, who kills them, and everything else that happens. And I'm going to tell you about what's happened in Season 4 of Criminal Minds Evolution. So if you haven't watched Season 4, there will be spoilers. And if you've only seen Season 4, there won't really be any spoilers for previous seasons, but I make no promises. Let's get started by talking about the data collection. But real quick though, if I say the original series, I mean the first 15 seasons that aired from 2005 to 2020. If I say season 1, 2, 3, or 4 specifically, I'm talking about Evolution since that's really the focus of this video. Anyway, to record the data, I simply watched each episode and wrote down what happened when a crime got committed. The data points I recorded were the IMDb rating, taken just a few days after the season finished, the crime, based on a list defined after analyzing several shows, the cause of death, which is also based on a predefined list and categorizes how murder victims died or serves as a subcategory for other crimes, the criminals, which is just who commits the crime, non-murder victims, which is the number of victims who did not die as a result of that crime but were still affected by it, the number of male and female murder victims with only on-screen deaths counted. If I don't see someone actively dying, clearly about to die, or a body at a crime scene, it is not recorded. I also record the state, which is where the crime occurred and is only recorded based on the number of episodes and not on the number of crimes. The opening and closing quotes, but more specifically, the name of the character who reads the quote, criminal deaths, which counts how many criminals died in that episode, and criminal arrests, which is how many criminals got arrested in that episode. I also record what I call the last victim, which is whether or not the last person to be threatened by a criminal in that episode survives. And finally, some crimes have gray areas and are not recorded, more on that in a minute, and also flashbacks, which I have decided always count for this show because it is seeing someone die on screen. The first section I want to talk about is crimes and criminals, because this is a crime show, and there was a variety of crimes this season committed by a variety of criminals. I made this hierarchy chart a few years ago, and this is what I base all my crime show analyses on. Basically, I record murder over all other crimes. If a victim dies as a result of a crime, it is murder. A single victim can be the victim of multiple crimes as long as it is multiple episodes or multiple clearly separate incidents. Then, as you go down the hierarchy, crimes can imply the ones below or on the same level. The most common implied crime is abduction, like taking someone to another location and murdering them. And unless someone is held for an entire episode and the second crime only happens at the very end, then I try to record any other crime that happens before I record abduction. Finally, I don't record relatively minor crimes in the bottom green box, such as evidence tampering, breaking and entering, and things along those lines. However, so the crimes I record for Evolution are murder, kidnapping, abduction, explosion, mayhem, other, and attempted murder. The only difference between kidnapping and abduction is that kidnapping is under 18, abduction is over 18, and if you're not familiar with mayhem, it's basically advanced maiming. It's kind of like assault, but in the context of this show, I use mayhem to mean that someone is being injured in a way that is permanently disfiguring or otherwise torturous. But the important thing is that they don't die and that murder is not the criminal's intent. And I think the rest of these crimes are pretty self-explanatory. I also record subcategories that I call causes of death or CODs because I mostly use it to categorize murder. All of them are also pretty self-explanatory. There's shooting, stabbing, other, unknown, poison, bludgeoning, explosion, drowning, and asphyxiation. But I do want to clarify that stabbing means anything pointy, and other is anything I don't know how else to classify. Unknown is when the cause of death is either never shown, never explained, or the BAU just doesn't know either. And I generally use asphyxiation and strangulation interchangeably, basically cutting off someone's air. This is where I write the crimes that I considered recording but ended up not. Again, things like assaults that are not permanently damaging don't get recorded, but the one thing this season I was unsure about was from the episode The Furies, where 2 men were tranquilized but only one was abducted. I figured that not recording the tranquilizing of the man who was not abducted was similar to not recording a tasing, so it was left off. I also did not record escaping from prison, mostly because I didn't know how to record it, but partly because it felt in line with some of the other things I don't record and it leads to other crimes later, even though escaping from prison is certainly illegal. Before getting into the exact crimes, I want to show this graph of all the on-screen deaths in Evolution. Across all 4 seasons, 79 people have died at the hands of a criminal, or maybe someone murdering in self-defense. Hollywood isn't really a criminal. Of those criminals, 8 have died at the hands of the FBI. Unfortunately, it wasn't until this season that I made very certain to record exactly who killed them. I have a notes column in my Excel sheet, but that's a cross between me describing who got killed and how, and a running reaction trying to keep the twists and details straight, and I didn't put a lot of information there in the first 2 seasons. What I could find in my mess of notes is that Lewis killed 1, Rossi killed 1, 2 died by either JJ and or Tyler, both were shooting, 1 was Tyler, and 1 was Luke or JJ, both were shooting. That does not add up to 8, but I'm also pretty sure local cops were responsible for a few. Then, 7 criminals took their own lives, which was a plot point in the first season and is the source of most of the suicides, except for one in season 4, the episode Cluster. This death was another gray area. It was the opening scene for the episode, and a man, Al Smith, causes a gas explosion in his apartment, and 2 others are injured as well. However, the BAU finds out that Al Smith was lobotomized by David Graham, the criminal that episode, and while the lobotomy probably led to the suicide, I ended up recording suicide and the crime as an explosion caused by Al Smith, since it wasn't technically a murder, but 2 people were injured. And finally, there have been 2 non-crime deaths, both of which were in season 3. One was a girl who abruptly died of an autoimmune disease, and the other was Will, JJ's husband, who had an aneurysm. This chart shows all the crimes that occurred in season 4. This was a weird season, and I'll get into that. But to start, there were 18 murders, which I will go into more on the next slide, but there were also 10 abductions, 2 explosions, 3 mayhems, and 1 attempted murder. 2 of those murders were Elias Voigt, flashing back to his previous crimes, and 2 of those happened in 2022, but their bodies were found in present day. Each season tends to have a lot of abductions, but a lot of the ones this season lasted the entire episode. The episode starts with someone getting abducted, the BAU spends that episode trying to find them, and they get saved at the end. However, there were also a few abductions that lasted multiple episodes, and each abduction, from taking the victim until their rescue or death, is only counted once. Lance Kingston and Laura Boyd were both held for multiple episodes, though with Lance, he was abducted as a cliffhanger ending. I just mentioned the episode that starts off the episode Cluster. It is never confirmed that the other 2 men in the explosion lived or died, but the coroner looking at the one dead man says he has very bad burns and that the other 2 weren't so lucky. I interpreted this as meaning that they lived, but with serious injuries. Hence, there were 2 victims of the explosion, but it's not under murder because they didn't die. As for the 3 mayhems, one was the branding of Lance Kingston with the word pathetic, one was the man who was lobotomized, on screen at least. There was another one that had occurred previously that we didn't see on screen, and Laura Boyd was repeatedly electrocuted, which is again closer to torture, but I do often use mayhem as a close enough for torture. Additionally, the one attempted murder this season, Brian Garrity, was by asphyxiation, but he did live. And at the very end of the last episode, we got the setup of next season by mentioning unidentified body parts sent to several FBI field offices. We don't know anything else about this yet, and since nothing was shown, nothing was recorded. But I am intrigued by this premise, since I recall an episode in the original run where body parts were mailed to people. And I only remember that because I think I put serial killing and mail crime as the crimes for that episode, which is Rule 34, by the way. That's the name of the episode. Looking at crimes across all of Evolution so far, 78 people have been murdered by a criminal, 6 children have been kidnapped, there have been 34 abductions, 5 victims of explosion, 4 mayhems, 3 of which were this season, remember, 1 crime classified as other, and 11 attempted murders. Generally, the crimes in this show are pretty easy to classify. The first question is, did they die? And I go from there. Only 1 crime so far has been classified as other. That crime comes from season 1, where Elias Voigt murdered a dog. I do this with other shows I've recorded data for, where a character murders a dog, but the murder category is for humans, so it goes under other. And I'm honestly surprised there hasn't been another other yet. I'm surprised the writers haven't come up with something that's so weird I don't know what to do with it. Anyway, both in season 4 and Evolution overall, murder is the most common crime. But how did those 78 people die? How did those 17 people this season die? Season 3 of Evolution had only 6 causes of death, the vast majority of which were gun and shooting. Season 4, however, had a lot more variety. This season, there were 3 gun deaths, 2 stabbings, 4 others, 2 unknowns, 2 bludgeonings, 1 explosion, and 3 asphyxiations. As I mentioned earlier, this season introduced the shovel blade as a stabbing weapon, a possible use of a shovel I never considered before. Also introduced was shoving money down someone's throat until they die. That's under other, and that's actually 2 of the other deaths. And the other was getting embalmed to death, kind of like exsanguination, but with embalming fluid involved. And those are the other 2 other deaths. The 2 unknowns come from the episode Body Count, where the cause of death is either unknown to the BAU or they just never explained it. The 2 victims were killed in 2022, so the BAU not knowing is a possibility. Although they did catch the criminal, so I'd imagine they would have figured it out at some point. Explosion as a cause of death is unrelated from the incident of explosion as a crime. The victim here was Lance Kingston, and he was specifically targeted with an exploding car, or it might have been an exploding phone. I honestly didn't really catch it. Finally, I just want to mention that the 2 bludgeoning deaths in The Witching Hour were genuinely some of the most disturbing deaths in the history of this show as a whole. Those 2 people getting their heads absolutely decimated with a sledgehammer is up there with the puppet episodes in terms of the amount I was disturbed while watching it. Anyway, I do think that this season, using a variety of causes of deaths, made the season not only more interesting to watch, but a little scarier or unexpected. I just mentioned that this season saw fewer gun deaths than previous seasons, and the first thing to notice on this graph of the CODs across all seasons is that most of them are gun deaths. There's been 23 overall, but there were only 2 in Season 1, 7 in Season 2, 11 in Season 3, and 3 in Season 4. So nearly half of them were in Season 3. Stabbing is the second most common category, but it does cover a lot more weapons than just gun. Stabbing has included knives and shivs and shovels and a pen. If we break it down by season, there were 7 in Season 1, 3 in Season 2, 7 in Season 3, and 2 in Season 4. Season 4 has really been the season of using any other method to kill people. As for the unknown cause of death, I mentioned that 2 were this season, but the third appeared back in Season 1 as part of a flashback, similar to this season's. Overall, this season has seen less of the more common causes of death, probably with the exception of asphyxiation. It's been about a third of those deaths. Now I want to change direction and talk about the criminals who committed those crimes. To start off, across the whole show, there have been 44 people who committed a crime. This season saw 4 female criminals, which is half of that total count across 4 seasons. There's been 8 women and 36 men. Looking at the criminals individually, these are their victim counts sorted by murder victims and victims of other crimes who survived. At least for a little bit. Sometimes they die a few episodes later. I'll admit it's getting pretty messy since there are a lot of criminals now, 4 seasons in, but I wanted to point out Elias, with 10 murders on screen and 8 other crimes on screen, and all of the criminals who appeared this season, everyone including Noel and Caleb Warner, and to the right of them. The big bad of Season 4 was the fan, real name James Crowley, and you can see his column right here. He only killed 2 people. A woman at the end of the first episode, whose name I neglected to write down, and Lance Kingston. He also committed several abductions, some mayhems, and an attempted murder, so his other crimes do total 8. These next 2 slides are the criminals and their respective crimes, along with their fates. An A means arrested, a D means dead, and an S is dead by suicide. The first episode featured Noel and Caleb Warner, who were both arrested at the end. Their crimes were murdering a man with a shovel to the chest, and abducting and holding 2 couples, 2 men and 2 women. At the end of the first episode, we saw Jace Kirkland. He was also arrested. He strangled a woman and then shoved money down the throats of 2 women, which was recorded as other. Al Smith ended up dying by suicide. He caused an explosion that killed himself and maimed 2. He was also a victim of David Graham. David Graham, who was arrested at the end, previously lobotomized 1 man, lobotomized a man, and then abducted a man. Jesse and Riley Poole, who were arrested at the end, killed a mother and daughter in 2022. Those were the unknown deaths. Sean Fincher, who was killed by Tyler, previously killed 1 woman and bludgeoned 1 man and 1 woman. Peter O'Connor, who was arrested, orchestrated the murder of a man, but the shot was actually fired by Billy Lowell, who is not recorded as a criminal. Maria Abate and Ruby Russo, who were both arrested, previously killed 1 man and then shot 2 men. They did also tranquilize another man, but that was not recorded. Marvin Bancroft, who was killed by Luke and or JJ, embalmed 2 women alive, which was recorded as other, and abducted 1 woman. James Crowley / the fan, who ended up dead at the hands of Holly Voight, abducted Lance Kingston over 2 episodes, branded Lance Kingston, abducted Laura Boyd, exploded Lance Kingston, electrocuted Laura Boyd, which is mayhem, set off an explosion which injured Luke, and abducted Holly Voight. He committed the most crimes of anyone this season. The last death this season was of James Crowley, who was stabbed at the hands of Holly Voight, but Elias took the fall. Hence, she was not arrested, so she kind of got away with it, which is why I haven't put a fate for her. She's not arrested or dead, she's just going back to her life, I guess. Speaking of the Voights, Elias Voight has been in prison this entire season. Or most of it, at least. He hasn't killed anyone new, which means his kill count remains the same, 65. The only new information about him came in the form of flashbacks. We saw him strangle 2 women in 2 separate flashbacks, but those women are part of the 65. They might have even been in the shipping containers. Also, I want to thank the writers for not retconning the kill count this season in the episode body count. 2 minutes into the episode, I was about to get really annoyed if I had to recalculate that, because it was annoying to recalculate it over the first 3 seasons of this show. My season 3 video, which I'll link in the description, covers Elias Voight's specific kill counts and how I figured it out. Now on to the victims of the crimes. I made this chart 4 years ago when I did my project on the original run of this series. I'll link it in the description, but just know that was my first project and my first video, so it's not very good. But this very messy flowchart, which is actually also my first flowchart, does illustrate my observation back in the very first season of Criminal Minds, that way back in the first season of the Criminal Minds, the BAU has a very high success rate of not only catching criminals, but also saving the last victim whenever there is a race against the clock scenario. Basically, this chart is how I decide the value of my does the last victim live column. If there's any sort of hostage situation, standoff, or race against the clock to save someone's life, then it's a simple does that victim being held by the killer make it out alive, as long as they are the last person hurt or threatened in that episode. Sometimes, however, that doesn't happen, and maybe the last victim just died earlier in the episode, so it's an L. The third option is NA, or not applicable, which is reserved for cliffhangers and the rare episode without any crimes. This is how often the last victim survives over all of Evolution. Usually, they do save them. 21 episodes out of 40 end with the victim very clearly surviving. Even with the not applicables, they do tend to get saved in the next episode, even if they aren't the last victim of the following episode. Of the NAs, though, 3 are from episodes with no on-screen crimes, hence there was no victim to save. Season 4 has 6 last victims who did survive. There were only 2 that didn't, the mother and daughter in body count, because they were actually dead since 2022 and there were no other crimes the entire episode, and the final episode, Bad Blood, where the last victim was James Crowley, killed by Holly Voigt. The 2 not applicables this season were Lance Kingston getting abducted at the very end of The Witching Hour, and Laura Boyd getting strangled in her car at the very end of Requiem, which turned out in the next episode was an abduction and not a murder. As for the genders of the murder victims in Season 4, there were 9 women and 8 men. The first 3 seasons all had majority male murder victims, but this season was majority female, but it was much closer to an even split. If you look at Evolution as a whole, it is 20 female victims to 42 male victims, a roughly 1/3, 2/3 split. In fact, every show I've recorded data for has this pattern, except for Fargo, but each season stands alone in that show, so it's a little different. But every other show has had a 2/3, 1/3 split in the murder victim gender. The majority gender depends on the show, but it is every show. If we break down the number of male and female murder victims in Evolution by season, Season 1 had 61% male, Season 2 had 75% male, Season 3 had 65% male, which is also a 2/3 split, and Season 4 had 44% male, the only season so far to not have majority male victims, even if it is only by 1. And now on to the locations the BAU goes. Unfortunately, this is not something I recorded by crime, I just recorded it by episode, because back when Evolution started 4 years ago, I was trying to record data as close as possible to the way I recorded it for the original series, but the different format of the show made it so I couldn't just do it exactly the same. I had to change it up, but I ended up not changing how I recorded the states, which does make it easier for me to compare my data to the original series, but it makes it a little harder to compare it to the crimes. Most of the crimes in this show happen around Quantico, namely Virginia, Maryland, and DC. A lot of episodes also have crimes in the Southwest states. I don't know why there's so many episodes taking place in the Southwest, and there's not that many episodes repeating those states, but quite a few southwestern states were filled in this season. There's also Washington that has a higher count because back in Season 1 when they were looking for Elias, there were 5 episodes with crimes in Washington because that's his home state. Season 4 also added some new states in, at least for Evolution. Season 4 also added a few new states in. States new to Evolution at least, not the series as a whole. We saw 2 episodes, the episodes Now and Then and Bad Blood, which took place in Pennsylvania, which were both involving James Crowley because I think he's from there. The episode The Witching Hour was in Colorado. There was an episode in New Mexico, that episode was The Furies, and there was also one in Florida, that episode was also Bad Blood, also James Crowley. I realized while I was editing this that I never actually put a slide with the original run locations in. Much like Evolution, quite a few episodes cross state lines, so this does add up to more than the actual number of episodes, which I think is 323. Anyway, what I wanted to point out was that most episodes are in Virginia, DC, and Maryland, around the area where the show takes place, where Quantico is, or they're in California, where the show is filmed. Evolution has only had 2 episodes in California, and they seem to stick around the DC area a bit more. Interestingly, Evolution has given West Virginia 3 episodes when there was only 1 in the first 15 seasons. Also, both Iowa and Utah got a 3rd episode, but generally, most of the states already saw some episodes. In terms of international episodes, there were 6 in the original run, but they have not left the US in Evolution, which kind of makes sense. They're a United States government agency. The other thing I want to point out here is where they haven't gone. The only states the BAU has never gone to are Hawaii and North Dakota. I can't imagine they're going to go to Hawaii, and I was a bit surprised they even went to Alaska, but I am a bit surprised they've never gone to North Dakota, especially when they've gone to South Dakota. Anyway, I just wanted to show this as a comparison. And now I want to talk about the ratings, specifically ratings I've taken from IMDb, which are left by users who have watched the show. Here we see the IMDb ratings of episodes over Evolution so far. The gaps between the points separate the seasons. There's a bit of a downward trend across the first 3 seasons, but the 4th has kind of broken that. It's gone up a bit. Viewers certainly seem to enjoy Season 4. Better than Season 3 at least. Additionally, the first 3 seasons had a trend where the actual climactic event was in the 9th episode, and the 10th wraps everything up, meaning the last episode was rated slightly lower since there was less going on. That isn't the case with season 4 though. The last 2 episodes both increased in rating, and I thought the 10th episode, while wrapping up the plot, was still pretty exciting and contained that climactic event. I know I certainly like season 4 better than the last few, so I kind of agree with these ratings. You can also see just how close together the ratings were this season. The plot was consistently enjoyable. You can also see just how close together the ratings were this season. Plot was consistently enjoyable. The ratings aren't as tight together as in season 1, but definitely more so than seasons 2 and 3. This table shows a comparison of the IMDb ratings over 19 seasons of Criminal Minds. It should be noted that for the original 15 seasons and the first 2 Evolution seasons, all those ratings were taken at the same time, just after Evolution Season 2 finished, which was about 2 years ago. Season 3 ratings were taken when Season 3 finished, and Season 4 ratings when Season 4 finished. But this table has the average rating, the standard deviation, and the min and max IMDb ratings, which allows us to see which seasons were good, bad, and which were pretty consistent. You'll notice that the first 2 seasons of Evolution and the 4th are the lowest standard deviations of all. This makes sense, and stems from the different format the show takes on. Standard deviation in the context of viewer ratings tells you how consistent the ratings are. It tells you how consistently good or consistently bad the episodes are. If it's higher, that means there might be some really good episodes, but there might also be some really bad episodes. Evolution follows one story over the course of the season, with a smaller story in each episode that may or may not connect to the larger story. If the larger story is bad, then the season ratings will reflect that, whereas in the original run, there generally wasn't an overarching plot that got brought up in every single episode. One bad episode plot in an otherwise average season isn't going to have too much of an effect on whether people enjoy the season as a whole. But with Evolution, that whole overarching plot has to be good, hence the lower standard deviations overall. Except for season 3, but people just seem to like that one less overall. It is the lowest rated season of the entire show. As for season 19, this very bottom row, there was an average rating of 7.7, at least as of July 29th, 2026. The finale aired 6 days ago, and the ratings have changed a fair bit for most of the episodes from the time I watched them. However, if anything, this is probably going to go down a bit. At 7.7, season 19 is the 5th highest season, ranking between season 3 and season 5. But knowing this will go down a bit, I imagine it's settling around a 7.4, maybe a 7.5, but it'll probably still be 5th. The standard deviation this season was 0.31, which is pretty good. It's a little higher than the first 2 Evolution seasons, but lower than all the seasons of the original run. So while maybe none of the episodes stuck out as being particularly good or amazing, none of them stuck out as being really bad either. The min and max ratings were 7.2 and 8.3, pretty in line with the later seasons of the original run and Evolution. Finally, I want to talk about the quotes, which I see as the hallmark of the show because it's said at the start and end of every episode. The quotes this season were a little more reminiscent of the show's roots. Just about every episode of the original run had an opening and a closing quote. Very few episodes missed them. But Evolution, while generally having an opening quote, nearly every episode is missing the closing quote. Only the first and last episode of season 1 of Evolution had a closing quote. Until this season, we had 5. Still not quite the amount you would expect from the original Criminal Minds, but it's certainly a little closer. As for the characters who said the quotes, this graph shows the counts for all of Evolution. Rossi has the most with 10, followed by a tie between Prentiss and Elias at 7. In season 19, Rossi also had the most quotes. He said 3. There was 1 in the first episode and 2 in the last episode, so he really bookended the season. Lewis said 1 quote this season, JJ said 2, Prentiss said 2, Alvis said 1, Garcia said 2, both in the same episode, and Tyler had 1. There were no Elias quotes this season. But what about the quote counts across the whole show? I have combined the quotes from Criminal Minds in the lighter color on the bottom with Criminal Minds Evolution, the darker color on the top. For most of Criminal Minds, Hotch was the big in-charge boss, and he left and that role kind of seemed to go to both Rossi and Prentiss. So for a while, Hotch was doing a lot of the quotes, along with Rossi. Since Hotch isn't in Evolution, Rossi and Prentiss do the most quotes. And while they are still some of the top quoters, Hotch is still in the lead. I think it'll take at least another season or 2 before Rossi has a chance at overtaking him. It seems that even with the additional Evolution quotes, the characters are still in the same order if you sorted them by how many quotes they did in each series. Except for JJ, who at the end of the first 15 seasons of Criminal Minds was tied with Gideon and just below Morgan, is actually now above both Gideon and Morgan. As for Tyler, the newest addition to the team, a move that still doesn't logically make sense to me, he's been here about as many episodes as Elle ever was, but has had twice as many quotes. He's at 2. Also, while we're talking about all of the characters, I did notice there were more references and allusions to Gideon, Hotch, and Reed than in any other season of Evolution. And I know that because I write down their name and the word mention in my notes every time they're mentioned. However, it's only over those 3 and 2 times that they referenced Morgan in season 2. Elle, Blake, Callahan, and Simmons, it's like they were never there. And honestly, they kind of were only there like 2 seasons max. Simmons was 3, but they were shorter. Anyway, I do think it's interesting that they've been referencing some of these missing characters more lately. And that's all I have for my analysis of Criminal Minds Evolution Season 4. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to watch my other Criminal Minds videos, I'll make sure to link them in the description. Going based on IMDb and the fact that they started setting up a plotline that hasn't come to fruition yet, I think there is going to be a Season 5 of this show, and I will of course make a video about it next summer. So subscribe if you want to make sure to watch it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.